The final question that you will see on the Elizabeth paper, you actually get a choice between two questions. So it says at the top of the paper up here, answer either question 3 or question 4. And what I advise that you do is read each question properly before you make your decision. So think really carefully about whether you're going to be able to write 4 or 5 paragraphs for the question before you start trying to answer it. And that might mean that you make some little notes in this space here next to the questions, and you actually spend 5 minutes thinking about what you would write before you even start to try and attempt the paper. For the two questions that you've got on the 2025 paper though, they are quite different really, they come from different ends of the course. So question 3 says that Elizabeth's religious settlement was successful, and so what this question is asking you is whether or not you think it worked what she set out to do. And this is asking you to think back to the fact that Elizabeth wanted to create a middle way, a middle ground between Catholicism and Protestantism, because she was trying to create stability in her kingdom as she took over from Mary. And do you think she was able to do that? So you'll want to think about the rebellions that took place. This question doesn't actually give you a time period, so it's up to you to determine where it is that success comes in. It might even be that it's later on. You might also want to think about some of the challenge that she faced from Catholics inside the country, Catholics abroad, the Protestants, also the people inside the church. So all of those things would feature in that question, hopefully. Or your second choice here is the main reason for the increase in poverty in the years 1558 to 88 was the increase in population of England. So this question is asking you to think just about the causes of poverty in England. So it does give you some suggestions. It says that you might want to talk about unemployment, you might want to talk about bad harvests. You could also talk about things like trade, like the wool trade, inflation, maybe thinking back to the dissolution of the monasteries from the 1530s. And really it's personal preference which question you answer. So you just want to decide, am I more confident talking about religion and that early part of Elizabeth's reign, or am I more confident talking about the social issues that we looked at towards the end of the course and thinking about poverty? And once you've decided, you'll see if you turn over the page, it asks you to indicate at the top. It is really important that you make sure you select the right question, and there's really clear guidance at the top. You just put a small cross in the box for whichever one you want to answer. If you don't put a cross in the box, then it just impacts the way that your work gets marked. So it might delay the marking slightly, but it will still get marked either way. So don't panic if you do this incorrectly, but do try your best to put a cross in the relevant box. Okay, so I'll just show you the start of this question then. So I'm going to, for this example, show you question 4. So I'm going to put a cross in that question 4 box. Question 4, remember, was the one about the causes for the increase in poverty. Now, the question, if I just turn the page back to the question a second, it was here, it is. So it says the main reason is actually the increase in population. So it's important that I'm remembering that this is what the question is asking. So it is asking me for the causes of poverty, but mostly I need to focus on increase in population. So as I start my answer, that's the bit that I'm going to put at the top here. So I'm going to put to a certain extent. So to a certain extent, the main reason for the increase in poverty was the increase in population. But I'm going to just outline certain parts of my later argument here by also identifying things like unemployment and bad harvests. So, however, there were other contributing factors such as unemployment and bad harvests. I mean, really, when I come to it, I'm probably going to link population and unemployment together, but it was nice to get some of those keywords right in the beginning so the examiner knows I'm focused on what the question is asking me. In answering this question, I need to make sure that I am using Peel paragraphs, so point, evidence, explanation, and then link it back to the question to keep it nice and focused. And that I'm focusing on what the question is asking me, which is, was population growth the biggest cause for poverty? If it is asking me about a certain factor, that factor should be the first things that I write about. So my first paragraph here is, one reason poverty increased was the rapid population growth. The population rose from 3 million in 1550 to 4 million by 1600, with no real change in number of available jobs or land. And this meant that the wages stayed low while people struggled to find work, and in addition, the demand for food increased, which pushed prices higher. People struggled to afford basic necessities. Therefore, I agree that population increase caused a growth of poverty. It is not very common that we used first person in history. However, this question is asking me, do I agree? And so it is completely fair to use those words in your link part of your paragraph where you are being really explicit about your judgment that I agree that population increase caused this growth. Once you've covered that first factor, which is the one that's listed in the question, we can then move on to other factors. After my introduction and my paragraph where I've discussed the factor that's listed in the question, I'm then going to have an extra maybe 3 Peel paragraphs where I discuss other factors. So there were further increases in food prices which also contributed to poverty. A series of bad harvests in the 1590s caused by bad weather led to shortages. Poorer families had to spend most of their wages on bread as grain prices rose. Survival became difficult. So there are other factors beside population growth which caused poverty increase. Changes in the wool trade also pushed people into poverty. Some landowners enclosed common land for sheep raising to profit off the growing wool trade. This meant poorer farmers lost access to land and rural workers were forced off land. They ended up unemployed and potentially vagrants. Without land or work, this increased poverty. This was just as impactful as population changes. Remember, the question is asking us specifically about whether or not we think population changes are the most important. So it is important to keep coming back to that at the end of each paragraph. Finally, there were ongoing challenges with lack of support for the poor following the 1530s dissolution of the monasteries by Henry VIII. They had previously provided food and alms or money for the poor. When they were closed, this support disappeared, causing an increase in poverty. It certainly increased the number of visibly poor or vagrants in society. This predated Elizabeth's reign, but had lasting impacts which were compounded by the growing population. Okay, so I've now done 4 or 5 paragraphs, and I just need to wrap it up to make sure that I'm really clear about what my judgment is. So overall, I partly agree that population growth was a major cause of poverty increase. However, other factors such as enclosures, poor harvests, and lasting effects of changes to religious houses also contributed. Population growth, whilst important, was not the single cause. So I've been really clear there at the end that I've made a clear judgment, because ultimately this question wants me to have explained factors and come to a clear conclusion. Throughout, I've also included lots of key terms like vagrancy, which is important when you talk about poverty, and I've included lots of dates. So that's how you achieve full mark on that question.